Thank you for joining us on News 24. We're live from Cape Town this morning, and I'm sitting down to discuss via Skype the situation in Darfur and the Sudan. Really important issue in terms of South Africa's exit from the International Criminal Court. And with me via Skype from Geneva is Professor Mukesh Kapila. He joins us as a former head of the United Nations in the Sudan in the early 2000s. Good morning, Professor.
Good morning.
Now, Professor, you were in the Sudan just as some of the conflict in Darfur was sort of spiraling out of control. We're going to get into the kind of depth of your experiences and what you witnessed shortly. But in summary, if you were to put your experience and what you discovered about what happened in Darfur into a few words, how would you characterize the conflict there?
When I got to Sudan in 2003, the violence I saw unfolding in Darfur reminded me so much of what I had seen with my own eyes in Rwanda 10 years previously, because I'd also been there. So it didn't take me very long to figure out that what was going on in Darfur was actually the same thing. It was ethnic cleansing or genocide.
And the head of state at that time was, I believe, the same person who is head of state currently. Interesting, he was in South Africa last year. What were your dealings with the presidency in the Sudan like?
Well, as the head of the UN in the Sudan, it was my job to relate to the presidency every day. And they were basically not listening to all the evidence that was coming out of Darfur in terms of the escalating violence there. They denied it. They put it down to local skirmishes. And basically, they were in denial mode until the evidence could not be avoided.
It's sad to hear that what might be avoided is any kind of prosecution within the ICC structures. Now, we know that South Africa announced last week that we were planning to leave the ICC, and we're one of over 100 countries, many of them African countries, who signed something called the Rome Statute. And that document seeks to prosecute those accused of war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity. Now, before we go into more about Darfur and what we as South Africans need to know on the matter, here's a video from the Aegis Trust, which is a trust that Professor Kapila is involved with, and it gives us some idea of what his experience was like on the ground in Darfur. Let's take a look.
We knew from day one what was going on. Hardly a day would go by without an email report being sent to New York detailing the latest incident, including time, place. Very often we even knew which army unit was responsible.
My country, my country, my country.
The reaction from New York, there was no reaction. It is as if the reports disappeared into a black hole. I've been unfortunate in somehow becoming a student of genocide. Having witnessed at first hand Rwanda, Srebrenica, in my view, those who stand by and don't even try to do something are almost as culpable as those who stick the knife in or who pull the trigger. I started on a round of diplomacy, and every capital had access to intelligence information that I did not have, and yet they were doing nothing. So there was only one thing left, and that was tell the story as I knew it to anyone who would listen anywhere in the world. And there's only one way to do that, and that is through the media. And I knew that this would be the end of my career anyway. It was cold, calculated fury that was driving me towards the end, because there's nothing to lose, because everything had been lost, most of all the lives. And once the genie was out of the bottle, there was no going back. Not a single diplomat has been brought to account for the failure to act. In fact, many of them were promoted. when those who are in charge of institutions, charged with the responsibility to prevent and protect, fail in that duty, and there is no accountability for it, then the Darfur will happen again. And it'll happen again, and it'll happen again, and it'll happen again.
The land around now is completely scorched, as you can see, and the country depopulated. This is scorched earth policy. This is ethnic cleansing. This is a crime against humanity.
Now, Professor, I remember reading your book a couple of years ago, and it's chilling to see that footage and to see you talk about the cold rage, your rage at seeing what was happening in Darfur and seeing that nothing had been done. When you hear the news of African states, 2 already and more if people heed the call of Omar Bashir, more states considering withdrawing from the ICC and the principles of the Rome Statute. What's your response? What do you think of the claims that the ICC and its principles and its values are colonial and that African leaders should step away from that table?
I think such a criticism of the International Criminal Court is obviously self-serving. And I'm totally appalled that South Africa is going to leave the criminal court if its parliament approves. Now, the point here is that people in South Africa, have you forgotten of the evil of apartheid and the struggles you had at a time when, though the world's public was in solidarity, there was no mechanism for international justice. And then the justice you got was post-apartheid, when the regime in South Africa had been toppled. I don't understand why people in South Africa, or rather the government of South Africa, is against other Africans getting justice for the crimes that have been committed. And these are crimes against humanity. These are genocidal crimes. So all I can say is that not just that the South African government is misguided, but it is setting the cause of justice many, many decades back. And I'm totally and utterly appalled by it.
And if we speak to the question of human rights and human rights abuses and allegations of whole-scale warfare, people being pushed off their land, women and children being violently attacked as a tactic of war, those are in complete opposition, I would argue, with the values of the South African Constitution, which is a very hard-won document. Now, in your book, Professor, you speak of a particular person whose story and efforts to speak to you about what happened in Darfur drove you and motivated you to begin your campaign. Can you please speak to us a little bit about Aisha?
I'm sorry.
Professor? Sounds like we're having a bit of technical difficulty there. I'm asking Professor Mukesh Kapila, former head of the United Nations in the Sudan, for
I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
What he knows about a woman who survived a horrific experience of rape at the hands of 12 men in Darfur. She was raped in front of her family, in front of her husband, in front of her father, and in front of 2 of her children. And at the time, her attackers spoke to her and threatened her during the conflict in Darfur. Now, it's exactly those kinds of crimes that are the crimes that the ICC seeks to prosecute and hold leaders to account, and crimes which it seems South Africa's government does not take seriously enough to remain as a signatory on the ICC. Now, we're going to take a short break to see if we can get back with the professor and get his answer on meeting with that woman.